in the heart of a luxury airplane. Two black siblings quietly take their seats in first class. But the moment they buckle in, whispers begin, eyes judge, and one flight attendant decides they don't belong. What happens next doesn't just delay the flight. It grounds something far bigger. This is the story of a single phone call that made an entire plane rethink everything. Before we begin this powerful story, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. Your support helps us create more stories that open minds, awaken hearts, and remind us all what true dignity looks like. In the heart of a bustling airport in New York, Terminal 7 buzzed with excitement as passengers prepared to board Flight Horizon 701. Among the crowd were two well-dressed teenagers, a boy named Malik and his younger sister, Ayana. Malik, 17, was quiet and observant. Ayana, 13, had a warm smile that softened even the coldest stares. They each carried a small backpack, moved with confidence, but kept their voices low. As they approached the first-class boarding lane, a few passengers turned their heads. It wasn't what they wore or how they acted, but the color of their skin that drew eyes. Ayana noticed the stares, but held her brother's hand tighter. Malik whispered, "Ignore them. We're exactly where we're supposed to be." At gate A23, a flight attendant named Candace stood checking boarding passes. Her hair was tightly pinned, her uniform flawless. She smiled politely at the older white couple ahead of them, but when her eyes fell on Malik and Ayana, the smile dropped. "Excuse me," she said, holding up a hand as they presented their first-class tickets. "Are you sure you're in the right line?" Malik remained calm. "Yes, first class. Seats 2A and 2B. Candace frowned, scrutinizing the passes longer than necessary before scanning them reluctantly. "Very well," she muttered. "Just be seated quickly." They walked down the jet bridge without another word. Ayana leaned toward her brother. "Why'd she look at us like that?" Malik didn't answer. Inside the aircraft, first class gleamed with white leather seats and golden reading lamps. A businessman in a tailored navy suit glanced at them, then looked back at his phone. A woman in pearls and a beige cashmere sweater clutched her purse just a little tighter as they passed. Malik and Ayana sat down near the front. The moment they buckled their seat belts, Candace reappeared. "I'm sorry, I just want to double-check. Are these your actual seats?" Malik didn't flinch. "Yes. Is there a problem?" Candace's eyes narrowed. "It's just unusual. First class is typically reserved for elite members or premium passengers." Ayana looked hurt. Malik's jaw tightened, but he held his voice steady. "You've already seen our tickets. Please, let's travel in peace." Candace hesitated, then walked off, whispering something to another flight attendant. The atmosphere shifted. Passengers began to murmur. One man smirked. Another shook his head. Candace returned moments later, this time with a strained smile. "Sorry for confusion," she said too sweetly. "It's just standard protocol." But Malik knew better. What Candace didn't know, what none of them knew, was that a single call could change everything. And that call was about to happen. The plane had yet to leave the gate, but tension already gripped the cabin like a coiled spring. Malik leaned his head back, pretending to rest, but his mind was anything but calm. Across the aisle, Ayana fidgeted with the strap of her bag, her eyes darting from Candace to the other passengers who still seemed puzzled or annoyed by their presence. The man in the navy suit 2 rows behind them whispered to his companion. They must have snuck in or something. No way they paid for those seats. Candace hovered near the galley, watching the siblings with subtle yet obsessive glances. She picked up the intercom, whispered something, then hung it up. Ayana leaned toward Malik. "Can we just go back to economy? I don't want this." Malik shook his head firmly. "No, we belong here, Ayana. We earned this." But as soon as he finished his sentence, Candace returned. "I'm terribly sorry to do this," she said in a tone that was anything but sorry. "But there's been a seat reassignment issue. It looks like someone with a higher priority status has booked these seats. You'll need to move to the rear cabin." The entire first-class section quieted. Ayana's voice was barely a whisper. "She's lying." Malik stood up slowly. He reached into his pocket and took out his phone. His voice was low but sharp. "So we're being moved because we don't look like we belong?" Candace's smile froze. "I didn't say that," she said quickly. "I'm simply following airline policy." The businessman in the navy suit chuckled under his breath. The woman in pearls muttered. Finally, someone said something. Malik didn't respond to them. He looked Candace in the eyes and said, "Okay." Then he sat back down and dialed a number. The ringtone played once, twice. Then the call connected. A deep voice answered. "Malik, what's going on?" Malik spoke quietly. "She's doing it again, just like before. But this time in front of everyone." The other end of the call went silent for a second. Then the voice replied, "Understood. Stay seated. I'll take care of it." Candace leaned in. "Excuse me, who are you calling?" Malik locked eyes with her. "Someone who's going to make you wish you hadn't touched that intercom." Ayanna looked at her brother with wide eyes. The phone call was less than 30 seconds, but the ripple it would cause was about to be far more powerful than anyone on that plane could imagine. Just as Candace turned away, a message buzzed on the cockpit's control panel. The pilot, Captain Drew Mason, looked at it, blinked, then immediately picked up the handset to call ground control. Outside, the jet bridge was being reattached. Inside, Malik closed his phone and whispered to his sister, "Now watch." The seatbelt sign was still lit, but the engines never started. Outside the windows, the service crew had reconnected the jet bridge, a highly unusual procedure for flight moments from departure. Passengers murmured in confusion. "Why are we moving? I thought we were cleared to taxi. What's happening now?" Inside the cockpit, Captain Drew Mason stared at a screen. The message he received wasn't just any ordinary update. It carried a high-level clearance code, followed by 6 bolded words. "Do not depart. Secure cabin immediately." Captain Mason, a veteran with 20 years in the air, had seen everything from emergencies to technical failures. But this wasn't standard protocol, and it came from above his direct supervisor. He picked up the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We receive a request from air traffic control to delay takeoff temporarily. Please remain seated. Thank you for your patience." That was all he said. But to the trained ears of the flight crew, it meant something serious was about to unfold. Candace returned to the galley, her face pale now. She glanced at her fellow attendant, who whispered, "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything wrong," she snapped quietly. "They don't belong in first class. They probably used someone else's points." But her voice wavered. At seat 2A, Malik was calm. He gently squeezed Ayanna's hand, signaling her to stay still. Within minutes, a tall man in a gray airport security vest entered the cabin. But this was no ordinary security officer. His uniform bore a private insignia, one reserved for corporate-level internal affairs. He didn't speak to any passengers. He went straight to Candace. "Are you Miss Candace Loring?" She blinked. "Yes, I'm the lead flight attendant on this flight." He handed her a sealed envelope. "You are to step off this plane immediately. Bring your belongings." "What? Why?" she asked, trembling. "Please don't make this more difficult." Passengers began craning their necks. The man in the navy suit stood up in protest. "What's going on here? Why is she being removed?" Candace turned to him, now desperate. "I was just following policy. They don't belong here. I was trying to protect the airline standards." The officer didn't reply. She was escorted off the aircraft as whispers spread like wildfire. Some passengers looked shocked, others satisfied. But no one was more stunned than Candace herself, whose confident authority had crumbled in the space of 5 minutes. As the door closed again and the jet bridge was removed a second time, the plane sat in eerie silence. Captain Mason received one more message. "Proceed. Situation handled. Resume takeoff." He looked out toward seat 2A, and now, for the first time, he wondered who the boy sitting there really was. The engines finally roared to life. The delay had stretched nearly 30 minutes, but now the aircraft was moving. Passengers shifted in their seats, trying to piece together what had just happened. No explanation had been given, only the quiet removal of a senior flight attendant and the uneasy calm that followed. Malik sat still, one arm around Ayana's shoulders. She leaned into him, confused but no longer afraid. There was something in her brother's posture that she hadn't seen in a while, calculated composure. Behind them, the woman in pearls now stared in a mixture of curiosity and regret. The man in the Navy suit tapped nervously on his armrest. Meanwhile, a new attendant, a soft-spoken man named Theo, had taken Candace's place. He approached Malik and Ayana with a soft smile and knelt slightly to speak to them at eye level. "I'd like to apologize for what happened earlier," he said gently. "Please let me know if you need anything." Ayana looked up. "Thank you." Theo nodded and returned to his duties. His presence was different, calmer, less performative. Up in the cockpit, Captain Mason couldn't shake the urge to know more. After the flight had been cleared to continue, he requested access to the passenger manifest again. He scrolled to seat 2A. Passenger, Malik Brandon Chase. That surname. His breath hitched. He quickly searched the database linked to internal aviation partners. Parent/Guardian. A. D. Chase Chairman, Global Sky Group Holdings. Captain Mason leaned back, stunned. Sky Group Holdings wasn't just a shareholder of the airline. They were the majority investor, with enough power to fire any executive on the board with single call. And A.D. Chase, the elusive founder, was known not just for his wealth, but for his zero-tolerance policy on discrimination in all forms. His son had just been profiled and humiliated in first class, and now the entire plane had witnessed the fallout. In the cabin, Malik pulled out a small notebook. Inside was a quote his father had made him memorize when he was 10. "Power doesn't come from being seen. It comes from knowing when to be invisible until you're not." Ayana, noticing the notebook, asked softly, "Is Dad angry?" Malik shook his head. "He's not angry. He's disappointed. But this is what he wanted people to see. What we go through, even when we follow every rule." The intercom crackled again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now cruising at 30,000 feet. Flight attendants will begin meal service shortly." But in first class, the real story was just starting to settle. Passengers were finally beginning to question their own reactions. Malik had said nothing more, but everyone was starting to realize they had never been out of place. They had just been underestimated. Meal service had begun. Silver trays rolled through the aisles as passengers tried to pretend everything was normal again. But the tension that lingered after Candace's removal refused to vanish. The woman in pearls finally broke her silence. She leaned toward Malik and Ayana. "I just wanted to say, I hope you enjoy the flight," she offered awkwardly. Malik turned slowly, measured her expression, and replied with a calm nod. "Thank you." She opened her mouth as if to say more, then closed it. The weight of her earlier judgment hung in the air between them. She looked away, fiddling with her necklace. In the back of the plane, murmurs continued. One man whispered, "Something happened up there. I saw the guard escort her off." Another replied, "Those kids? Must be someone important." The man in the Navy suit, who had earlier laughed, now scrolled nervously through his emails. His eyes kept darting toward Malik, as if afraid he'd made a mistake too big to ignore. But Malik wasn't focused on them. He sat in silence, buttering a piece of bread, sharing it with Ayana, who smiled and took a bite. Their calm unnerved the cabin more than anger ever could. Then it happened. Theo returned to their row. In his hand was a sealed white envelope. This was just delivered to the plane system. "It's addressed to you, Mr. Chase." Malik accepted it quietly and opened the flap. Inside was a single card, handwritten. "We're proud of how you handled yourself. Your silence taught louder than their noise. ADC." Malik tucked the card away without a word. "From Dad." Ayana asked. Malik nodded. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a plain silver badge. Not police, not military. It was the Sky Group emblem, given only to internal family executives and high-clearance individuals. He placed it flat on the tray table, where it caught the light. Passengers nearby noticed it immediately. Whispers returned. Is that a Sky Group access badge?" That's a son. No way, that's the Chase family? No confirmation was needed. The badge said more than words ever could. The woman in pearls gasped softly. The Navy suit man froze. Ayanna reached for the badge, gently ran her finger across it. Do you think they'll treat us differently now? Malik didn't answer, because he already knew the answer. Somewhere above the Rocky Mountains, the seatbelt sign chimed softly. Passengers settled deeper into their seats, but the air in first class remained far from relaxed. Eyes still stole glances toward Malik and Ayanna. No one dared to speak directly to them, but the atmosphere had shifted, from suspicion to reverence, and then the cabin door opened. The passengers turned, startled, as Captain Drew Mason himself stepped out of the cockpit. It was unusual for a pilot to leave during mid-flight. Even more unusual for him to walk down the aisle toward a passenger. He didn't go to any random seat. He stopped right in front of 2A. "Malik Chase?" he asked, voice steady but respectful. Malik looked up and nodded. "Yes, sir." Captain Mason gave a short bow of his head. "I wanted to personally apologize for the way you and your sister were treated. I've served this airline for over 2 decades, and what happened earlier goes against every principle we're supposed to stand for." Ayanna looked up with wide eyes. Malik replied calmly, "Thank you, Captain. It wasn't just about us." "I know," Mason said, "but it started with you." There was a moment of heavy silence. The other passengers leaned closer, listening intently, pretending they weren't eavesdropping. Mason continued, "I received a message from corporate during the delay. I know now who your father is. But I want to make something clear. Your dignity should never have depended on that." Malik didn't respond right away. Instead, he asked, "Would you have come if you didn't know who he was?" The pilot hesitated. "I don't know," he admitted, honest and exposed. "But I'm here now, and I'm listening." Malik stared into the pilot's eyes. Then he stood and extended his hand. They shook. That single handshake, firm and silent, reverberated to the cabin like thunder. As the pilot returned to the cockpit, the rest of first class sat in stunned silence. No speech, no announcement, just a handshake that said everything. Malik sat down again. Ayanna whispered, "That was something." Malik smiled faintly. Sometimes the right silence is louder than shouting. Behind them, the man in the Navy suit slowly reached for his in-flight napkin and began wiping invisible crumbs off his tray, his face flushed with quiet shame. While first class reeled in awkward silence, something entirely different was happening just a few rows behind the curtain in business and economy class. A flight attendant named Mia had been watching everything. Though she hadn't been assigned to first class, she had seen the commotion earlier, the confrontation, the removal of Candace, and the strange presence of the man in the gray vest. She had also caught glimpses of Malik and Ayanna from a distance. Now, as she rolled the beverage cart down the aisle, a group of passengers leaned toward her. "Hey!" A woman in seat 14C whispered. "What's going on up there?" The pilot left the cockpit. "Yeah," said a man 2 rows back. "Did someone famous get on board or what?" Mia hesitated, then leaned closer. "I can't say much, but something happened with a couple of first-class passengers. It got serious enough to delay takeoff." "Let me guess," the woman smirked. "Those 2 kids they moved up? I saw them during boarding. Honestly, they looked out of place." Mia's expression hardened. "They didn't move up. That was their seat." The woman blinked. "Oh." "And the issue," Mia added, "wasn't with them. It was with someone who couldn't see past their own assumptions." The cart rolled forward, but the hush that followed her words rippled through the rows. Back in first class, the effect of the revelation were deepening. Passengers who had ignored Malik and Ayanna earlier now looked at them with cautious curiosity. The ones who had judged them were now reckoning with the weight of their silence. The Navy suit man stood suddenly. He stepped into the aisle, hesitated, then approached Malik's row. "Excuse me," he said, clearing his throat. I just want to say I'm sorry for what I said earlier. I made assumptions I had no right to make." Malik looked at him with steady eyes. "You weren't the only one." "I know," the man said, "but you handled it better than most adults I know, including myself." Malik nodded once. "Thank you for saying that." The man walked away, returning to his seat, and for the first time since boarding, the air in first class felt different. Not heavy with judgment, but with reflection. Ayanna took Malik's hand again. People are changing. Some are, he said quietly, but not because of what we said, because of what they saw. Behind them, the curtain to the other cabin swayed slightly. The story of what had happened on Flight Horizon 701 was already traveling down the aisles, one row at a time. At 35,000 feet, the world outside was clouds and quiet skies. But inside Flight Horizon 701, something was still in motion, an invisible ripple spreading far beyond the cabin. Back on the ground at JFK International Airport, a woman sat behind a long, black desk in a glass-walled office. Her name was Elena Ford, Vice President of Public Relations for Sky Group Holdings. Her screen had just lit up with a flag message marked urgent, Flight 701. She clicked it open. Attached was a brief incident report from the onboard internal investigator. At the top of the file, 3 names appeared. Passenger, Malik Brandon Chase. Passenger, Ayanna Chase. Crew, Candace Loring. Elena's heart sank. She picked up her phone and called a private number. The man who answered had a deep, gravel-edged voice. It was A.D. Chase. "They touched your son," she said simply. There was silence on the other end. Not the kind born of surprise, but of cold, deliberate calculation. "I gave them everything they needed," Chase replied. "I told Malik to never raise his voice, to never lose control, to let the truth show itself." "It did," Elena said, "and now everyone on that plane knows who he is." "Good," he replied, "but it's not about who he is. It's about what they are willing to believe when they don't know." Back in the sky, Malik had no idea that his father had just greenlit a quiet internal memo that would reach every airline partner under Sky Group's wing, a directive to retrain, audit, and discipline for any act of racial profiling effective immediately, not because of a scandal, not because of a lawsuit, but because one boy stayed seated and let the system expose itself. Meanwhile, in the galley, Theo approached Mia quietly. "Did you hear?" he whispered. "Head office just issued a fleet-wide notification. New inclusivity audit is being pushed out tomorrow." Mia raised an eyebrow. "Just because of what happened on this flight?" Theo looked toward Malik and Ayanna. "They're not just passengers. They're a mirror and a message." In seat 2B, Ayanna gazed out the window. "I wonder what Mom's going to say when she hears," she said softly. "She'll say we did what we were raised to do," Malik replied. "To make people see." A soft chime played across the intercom. The captain's voice came through, smooth and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent in approximately 20 minutes. Please prepare for landing." But even as the aircraft lowered, the weight of what had happened was only beginning to rise. The descent had begun. Seatbacks were upright, tray tables stowed, and the soft glow of the overhead lights bathed the cabin in golden calm. But no one in first class felt calm. Every passenger who had cast a doubting glance, every one who had made a silent judgment, now sat in quiet contemplation. It was as if the altitude drop was pulling their pride back down to earth. The woman in pearls, once tight-lipped and distant, reached into her designer handbag. From it, she pulled a small, embroidered notebook. Slowly, she tore a page and began writing. Her fingers trembled. When she finished, she folded the note and gently handed it to Theo, whispering something inaudible. Theo nodded and brought it to Malik. He looked at the envelope, then at the woman who now avoided eye contact, but clutched her bag like it weighed her conscience. Malik opened it. Inside, a handwritten apology. No name, just words. "I judged you before you spoke. I am ashamed. Thank you for teaching me something I didn't know I needed to learn." Malik folded the note and tucked it into his jacket. He didn't need a name. The message was enough. As the plane continued its descent, the captain made one final announcement. "On behalf of the entire crew, we thank you for choosing to fly with us today. We hope your experience was a comfortable one, and we apologize for any earlier disruptions." Passengers began gathering their belongings. The man in the Navy suit lingered behind. He hadn't moved since he returned to his seat. His eyes remained on Malik, not with superiority, but with quiet regret. He too had been taught something. Malik stood, stretching his legs. He helped Ayanna with her backpack and handed her a small piece of chocolate he'd saved from lunch. "You've been brave," he said. Ayanna smiled. "So were you." As the plane touched the runway with a soft bounce, passengers exhaled. But they weren't the same people who had taken off. Now they looked, not through the Chase siblings, not around them. They looked at them, really saw them, for the first time. And for many on that plane, it would be the beginning of a reckoning long overdue. The aircraft door opened with a hiss as the jet bridge locked into place. Outside, the sun over Los Angeles cast a warm glow over the tarmac, but inside Flight Horizon 701, the cabin had never felt colder. For those who had said nothing, Malik stood first. He adjusted his backpack, offered his hand to Ayanna, and the two began walking toward the exit. But this wasn't just a walk off a plane. It was a walk through a corridor of silence. The woman in pearls lowered her gaze. The Navy suit man parted his lips to speak, but said nothing. The businessman who had chuckled during boarding now turned away, his confidence shriveled into shame. Each step Malik and Ayanna took was deliberate, quiet, powerful. As they passed row by row, eyes followed, but not in judgment this time, not in mockery, in recognition. Theo stood by the exit, his expression proud but composed. "Have a safe journey, Mr. Chase." "Miss Ayanna." Malik nodded. "Thank you, Theo, for everything." Theo opened his mouth, paused, and simply smiled. Then, from the corner of the jet bridge, a tall woman in a dark coat and sunglasses stepped forward. She was elegant, poised, and instantly commanding. It was Amara Chase, mother of the siblings and wife to A.D. Chase. Without saying a word, she hugged both her children tightly. "I heard," she whispered, "and I'm proud." Malik pulled back, looking into her eyes. "We didn't fight. We didn't scream. We stayed still." "That's the loudest fight you can give," Amara replied. Behind them, Captain Mason exited the plane and approached. "Mrs. Chase," he said, nodding with visible respect. "It was an honor flying your family today." Amara studied him, then extended her hand. "Thank you for seeing them when others didn't." The captain shook it firmly. Passengers began filing off the plane behind them. A few gave polite nods. One woman mouthed the word sorry. Another man hesitated, then placed a hand over his heart before walking away. No one could undo what had happened at the start of the flight, but the end told a different story. Security officers on the tarmac stood at attention. Not for a celebrity, not for a politician, but for the quiet storm that had passed through their cabin and left behind something rare. Awareness. And as Malik, Ayanna, and Amara Chase stepped into the airport terminal, the story they left behind would not be forgotten by anyone still seated on Flight Horizon 701. The fallout from Flight Horizon 701 didn't wait until the passengers returned home. By the time Candace Loring stepped into her temporary housing near LAX that evening, she had already received a formal notification from Sky Group's executive board. It was short and final. Effective immediately, your employment is suspended pending a full investigation into misconduct and discriminatory behavior. You are not to contact any employee or passenger involved. She dropped the phone. Her hands trembled as she sat on the edge of the hotel bed, staring into nothing. She had never imagined her comments, delivered with a polished smile and laced with assumption, could cause a plane-wide upheaval. But they had, and now, her career of 15 years hung by a thread. In a conference room thousands of miles away, executives at Sky Group met in an emergency session. Elena Ford, the same woman who had spoken to A.D. Chase, stood at the head of the table. "There will be no cover-up," she said firmly. "This isn't a public relations issue. This is a character issue." Someone in the room muttered, "But there's no recording. It's her word against." She was removed mid-flight. Elena cut in. Passengers saw it. Crew confirmed it. And the boy she humiliated didn't raise his voice once. That's all the evidence we need. The room fell silent. Back in Los Angeles, Malik and Ayanna were home. Their house was modern but modest. Their family, though powerful, never flaunted its wealth. A.D. Chase was waiting in the living room, arms crossed. The moment Malik stepped in, his father approached, but not with anger, with pride. "I saw the footage," he said softly. "Theo sent it to me." Malik raised an eyebrow. "There was footage?" "Security cams near the galley. They caught more than she realized." Ayanna chuckled. Guess her fake smile couldn't cover that. A.D. sat them both down. "You didn't shame her. You didn't belittle her. You didn't play into the narrative they wanted you to. You reminded them who we are without saying it." Malik nodded. "We didn't need to say anything." "You didn't," A.D. said. "And yet, you've spoken louder than I ever could." On the table beside them, a stack of emails was growing. Dozens of letters from passengers on Flight 701. Some were apologies. Some were reflections. One even asked for permission to share the story in a diversity training program. The Chase family wasn't interested in revenge. They were interested in change. And for the first time, that change had begun not in a courtroom or a boardroom, but in a cabin 30,000 feet in the air. It had been 2 days since Flight Horizon 701 touched down, yet the echoes of what happened on board continued to ripple across the airline industry. News outlets had picked up whispers of the in-flight incident, not from press releases, but from anonymous posts made by passengers on social media. No names were mentioned, no faces shown, just fragments. "Something unforgettable happened on my flight today. We watched Prejudice walk the aisle and get walked off. A kid in first class taught us more than any seminar ever did." The posts were shared thousands of times. And though the Chase family said nothing to the press, their silence only amplified the story's reach. What truly captured the public's attention wasn't who they were, but how they acted, with dignity, with restraint, with calm power. At the Sky Group headquarters in New York, something rare was underway. Executives had begun drafting a new protocol, one that would go beyond surface-level diversity training. A task force was formed, internally referred to as Project Horizon, with one directive: prevent another Candace moment from ever taking flight again. And in the boardroom, A.D. Chase himself made a brief, rare appearance. He stood at the front of the room in a charcoal suit, unshaken, unblinking. "You can't screen for bias on a resume," he said. "But you can make it impossible for bias to survive in the air we claim is for everyone." The room nodded. No one questioned him. Meanwhile, far from headlines and policy drafts, Malik and Ayanna were back in their routine. Ayanna returned to school, where her teacher paused class to share a lesson about standing up by staying seated. Malik, however, had been invited to speak, quietly and privately, to a small leadership roundtable at a university. He declined the invitation. He didn't want to become a symbol. He just wanted to remind the world. The next time someone tells a young black teen they're out of place, maybe they'll remember how Flight 701 ended, because that flight never really landed. It became a movement. And for those who sat silently while judgment flew freely through the air, there was now a permanent reminder at cruising altitude. Some people don't need to shout to change everything. The morning sun poured through the tall windows of the Chase family's dining room. A quiet hum of birds outside, the soft clink of spoons against bowls. Life had returned to normal, or so it seemed. Ayanna sat cross-legged at the table, flipping through a book on aviation and doodling stars in the margins. Malik stood nearby, staring out the window, deep in thought. Their father entered, newspaper in hand. He set it down gently in front of them. The headline read, "Sky Group announces first-class reform after in-flight discrimination incident." No names, no photographs, just an official statement and a bold quote. "Respect isn't reserved for a seat number. It's the right of every soul on board." Amara joined them, holding a steaming mug of tea. She glanced at the paper, then at her children. "You changed something," she said quietly. Malik shrugged. "I didn't say a word." "You didn't have to," she replied. A moment passed. Then Ayanna asked, "Will people stop judging now?" A.D. sat down slowly. "Some will, some won't. But now they know they're being watched. Now they know silence is eyes." Outside, a black town car pulled into the driveway. The chauffeur stepped out and opened the door. It was time. Sky Group CEO Summit was being held at their private terminal, an event where change would no longer be a theory discussed behind closed doors. Malik had been invited, not as a guest, but as the opening speaker. He buttoned his blazer slowly, slipped a silver badge into his jacket, and turned to Ayanna. "Want to come?" She beamed. "Do I get snacks?" Malik laughed. "First-class snacks." As they walked out, the driver opened the back door. Ayanna climbed in first. Malik followed. The driver gave a small nod. "Mr. Chase, Miss Ayanna." They pulled away. In a different part of the country, Candace Loring sat in a small legal office, flipping through paperwork that reeked of consequences. Her lawyer looked exhausted. They're offering settlement but no job reinstatement. Candace exhaled, defeated. The paper trembled in her hand. Her world had shrunk to a few pages of regret. Meanwhile, Flight Horizon 701 became a case study, a turning point, a story passed from classroom to classroom, boardroom to boardroom, not because of a scandal, not because of revenge, but because two young passengers sat still and let the world move around them. And in the end, the seat they had fought to stay in, it was always theirs. Moral lessons from the story. Never judge someone by their appearance. The flight attendant assumed Malik and Ayanna didn't belong in first class simply because of how they looked. But her prejudice exposed her, not them. Everyone deserves respect, regardless of race, age, or appearance. Dignity is not defined by clothing or skin tone, but by character. Calmness can be the loudest power. Malik didn't argue. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His calm, composed response made more impact than any confrontation could. In a world that often rewards noise, quiet strength becomes revolutionary. Silence can speak louder than justice demands. True justice doesn't always come from shouting. It comes from standing firm and letting truth reveal itself. Malik taught that sometimes the most powerful action is to let others expose their own flaws. Power used with grace is power that inspires. Though Malik came from great privilege, he didn't flaunt it. He didn't use his father's name to belittle others. Instead, he used his influence to highlight the truth, and in doing so, inspired change. Real power uplifts. It doesn't crush,